close your eyes and let the modern world fade away. We are traveling back 2,000 years to the height of the Roman Empire. You are not in the marble-clad palaces of the Palatine Hill, nor are you a senator draped in fine purple-bordered togas. You are one of the millions, the ordinary people, the plebeians, who form the beating heart of Rome. It is just before dawn in the Suburra, Rome's most densely populated and chaotic district. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp stone, and the faint, lingering aroma of last night's street food. In Rome, the night never truly sleeps. Throughout the dark hours, heavy wagons have been rumbling over the basalt paving stones, delivering grain, wine, and timber, for these vehicles are banned from the city streets during daylight hours. But now, as the first gray light touches the rooftops, the wagons are departing, and the sounds of the working day begin to rise. You wake up in an insula, a Roman apartment building. This is not the spacious, airy villa you see in movies. Your home is a small, cramped room on the 4th floor. The insulae were the skyscrapers of the ancient world, often reaching 6 or 7 stories high, built from brick and wood and prone to both collapse and fire. Living higher up meant cheaper rent, but it also meant a longer climb and a more dangerous escape if the building succumbed to the frequent fires that plagued the city. There is no glass in your window, only heavy wooden shutters to keep out the chill. As you push them open, the city's roar greets you. You see your neighbors in the building across the narrow alley, a weaver starting her loom, a retired soldier sharpening a blade. Your bed is a simple wooden frame with a mattress stuffed with straw or wool. You don't change your clothes. Most ordinary Romans sleep in their tunics to stay warm and save time. Your first task is simple: hygiene. There is no running water in your room. While the great aqueducts bring millions of gallons into the city, only the wealthy have pipes leading directly to their homes. For you, water is a precious resource that must be carried by hand. You grab a clay pitcher and head down the dark, narrow staircase to the nearest public fountain on the street corner. The fountain is a social hub. Here, you exchange a few words with the local baker and the fruit seller as you splash cold water on your face and fill your jar. Returning to your room, it is time for intaculum, breakfast. It is a humble affair. A piece of coarse, dark wheat bread, perhaps rubbed with a clove of garlic or dipped in a bit of olive oil. If you are lucky, there might be a few shriveled olives or a piece of salty cheese. You wash it down with a cup of wine, heavily diluted with water. In Rome, wine is safer to drink than standing water, and even children consume it, though always tempered to ensure sobriety for the day's work. As you step out of your apartment building, you are immediately swept into the tide of Roman life. The streets are narrow, often no more than 10 feet wide, and they are teeming. You are dressed in a simple, knee-length wool tunic of a dull brown or gray color, the natural hue of the sheep's wool. The toga, that iconic garment of Rome, is heavy, expensive, and impractical for a day of labor. It is reserved for formal occasions and the elite. For you, the tunic and a pair of sturdy leather sandals are all you need. The Suburra is a sensory assault. To your left, a butcher is hanging joints of pork. To your right, a money changer is loudly clinking silver denarii on a marble counter. Schoolboys sit on the steps of a temple, scratching their lessons into wax tablets with bone styluses, while their teacher shouts to be heard over the din of the crowd. You pass a thermopolium, a Roman fast food shop, where the smell of lentil stew and spiced wine wafts from large ceramic jars set into a stone counter. Most ordinary Romans do not cook at home, as the risk of fire in the apartments is too great. These street-side kitchens are where the city eats. The social hierarchy is visible in every corner. You see a wealthy man being carried in a litter by 4 sturdy slaves, the curtains drawn to hide him from the dust and the smell. Behind him, a line of clients, men of lower status who seek his favor, follow him toward the forum. They hope for a small gift of money or a recommendation for a job in exchange for their political support. But you have your own path. Perhaps you are a carpenter heading to a construction site near the Colosseum, or a tanner working the hides by the Tiber River. Whatever your trade, you are part of the vast machinery that keeps the empire functioning. The morning sun is now climbing higher, burning off the mist from the river. The noise of the city is a symphony of hammers, shouting vendors, and barking dogs. This is Rome. Not the Rome of statues and monuments, but the Rome of sweat, bread, and daily survival. As we walk through these crowded alleys, remember that these people were not so different from us. They had worries about rent, they enjoyed a good joke, and they looked forward to a cold drink at the end of a long day. In the next part of our journey, we will follow the Roman worker into the heart of the city, exploring the markets, the great public baths, and the intense atmosphere of the Roman Forum at midday. The day is young, and the eternal city is just beginning to breathe. The sun has now climbed higher over the 7 hills, and the gentle coolness of the dawn has been replaced by the rising heat of the Mediterranean morning. The streets of Rome, narrow and winding, are now a river of human activity. If you were an ordinary Roman, your survival depended on your trade, and by mid-morning, your hands would already be calloused, dusty, or stained with the marks of your craft. In this era, there are no giant factories or office buildings. Instead, the economy of Rome lives in the tabernae, the small, one-room shops that line every major street. These spaces are often no larger than a modern garage with a wide opening that faces directly onto the sidewalk. By day, the heavy wooden shutters are removed, and the shop becomes part of the street itself. For many plebeians, the taberna is both a workplace and a home. A narrow mezzanine floor above the shop floor is often where the family sleeps, tucked away behind a thin curtain. Imagine walking past these shops now. To your left, a fuller is treading on cloth in a large vat, using a mixture of water and chemicals to clean and whiten the wool. It is a pungent, difficult job, but essential for a city that prides itself on its white tunics. Next door, a cobbler sits hunched over a wooden bench, his hammer rhythmically tapping as he reinforces the soles of a soldier's caligae with iron hobnails. The air here smells of tanned leather and beeswax. Each shop contributes its own note to the symphony of the city. The rhythmic clink-clink of the blacksmith's anvil, the scratching of a carpenter's saw, and the constant, low-level bargaining between merchant and customer. Bargaining is not just a financial transaction in Rome. It is a social sport. There are no fixed prices. Whether you are buying a liter of olive oil, a handful of dried figs, or a new ceramic lamp, the process is the same. You argue, you feign offense at the price, you walk away, and you are called back. It is a noisy, energetic dance that requires a sharp wit and a loud voice. As a worker, you might spend your morning earning just a few as the copper coins of the common people, knowing that most of it will go toward the week's rent for your room in the insula. By midday, the heat begins to radiate from the paving stones, and the crowd moves toward the great markets. Rome is a city that consumes everything the world produces. In the Masalum, the great central market, the variety is staggering. You see baskets of grain from the Nile Valley, amphorae of wine from the hills of Tuscany, and crates of salted fish from the Atlantic coast of Spain. The air is thick with the scent of garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans put on almost everything they eat. It is salty, sharp, and unmistakably Roman. For the ordinary worker, the mid-morning break is a time for a quick, cheap meal on the go. You don't head home to cook. Your apartment has no kitchen and the risk of starting a fire is too great. Instead, you stop at one of the hundreds of popinae, the Roman equivalent of a snack bar. Here, you stand at a stone counter and pay a few copper coins for a bowl of thick lentil stew or a handful of hot, roasted chickpeas. You might chat with a porter who has just come from the docks, or a low-ranking clerk from the forum. This is the true social fabric of Rome, not the grand speeches in the Senate, but the shared meals and grumbled complaints of the working class. Life is precarious for the plebeian. There is no social safety net. If you are injured and cannot work, you do not eat. Yet, there is a sense of pride in being a Roman citizen. Even the poorest man in the street knows that he is part of the most powerful civilization on earth. He walks the same streets as the emperor's guards and prays at the same massive temples that dominate the skyline. The sheer scale of the city, 1 million people living side by side, creates an intensity that is both exhausting and exhilarating. As the shadow of the obelisks grows shorter, signaling the approach of noon, a subtle shift occurs in the city's energy. The heaviest work of the morning is finishing. The porters are leaning against the cool stone walls of the temples, wiping sweat from their brows with the edges of their tunics. The constant shouting of the street vendors begins to soften. In Rome, the afternoon is not for work, but for the body and the soul. Soon, the shops will begin to close their shutters, and the great baths will open their doors. But before we follow the crowd to the water and the steam, take a moment to look at the hands of these people. They are the hands that built the arches, that wove the cloth, and that carried the grain. They are the hands of a people who lived in the shadows of giants, yet whose daily toil made those giants possible. The taberna may be small and the work may be hard, but this is where the Roman Empire was truly built. 1 copper coin and 1 day of labor at a time. As the bells of the temples ring out the midday hour, the workday for many is effectively over. The transition from the chaos of the market to the leisure of the afternoon is about to begin. In our next chapter, we will leave the dust of the workshop behind and step into the luxury of the Roman baths, exploring where the common people went to escape the pressures of the city. The sun is at its zenith. The city of stone and sweat is ready to rest. As the sun reaches its zenith and begins its slow, golden descent toward the Tiber, the heavy atmosphere of the Roman workday undergoes a profound transformation. In our modern world, we often view the afternoon as a time of renewed effort, but for the Roman plebeian, the arrival of the 8th hour, roughly 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, marks the end of labor and the beginning of the most essential social ritual of ancient life, the visit to the great public baths, or thermae. Step away from the dusty, crowded markets of the Suburra and follow the crowd. You aren't headed to a simple washroom. You are walking toward a palace of the people. In Rome, cleanliness was not a private luxury hidden behind the walls of a villa. It was a grand public spectacle. Even for a man with only a few copper coins to his name, the baths offered a fleeting taste of imperial splendor. As you approach the massive arched entrance of the Baths of Agrippa, or perhaps the towering vaults of Nero's complex, the scale of the architecture takes your breath away. Massive marble columns, intricate mosaic floors, and soaring ceilings decorated with frescoes of sea nymphs and gods make you feel small, yet strangely significant. Here, the emperor provides for your body as much as for your soul. You pay your entrance fee, the smallest coin in circulation, the quadrans, to the gatekeeper. For most citizens, this fee is so low it is practically free, a gift from the state to keep the populace healthy and, more importantly, content. You enter the appedaterium, the changing room. The air here is thick with the scent of cedarwood and sweat. There are no locked cabinets. You simply hand your clothes to a slave or place them in a small niche in the wall, hoping they will still be there when you return. Now, stripped of your tunic, the social distinctions that define Roman life begin to dissolve. In the baths, a wealthy merchant, a humble carpenter, and a freed slave all stand on the same wet marble tiles. Nakedness is the great equalizer of the Roman world. You begin your ritual not with water, but with oil. You rub olive oil over your skin, preparing your body for the heat. For those who can afford it, a slave might perform this task, but for you, it is a shared moment with a friend. The journey through the baths is a carefully choreographed transition of temperature. You start in the tepidarium, the warm room. It is a space of transition, filled with low benches and the gentle murmur of conversation. The heat is subtle, designed to open your pores and relax your muscles after a morning of heavy lifting or walking. You sit here for a while, perhaps leaning your head back against the cool stone wall, listening to the echoes of laughter and political gossip bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Romans do not bathe in silence. The baths are the city's primary newsroom. Here, you learn which grain ship has arrived from Alexandria, which senator is falling out of favor, and which gladiator is the favorite for the upcoming games. From the gentle warmth of the tepidarium, you move into the caldarium, the hot room. This is the heart of the engineering marvel that is the Roman bath. Beneath your feet, the hypocaust system is at work. Slaves in the basement tend to massive furnaces, pushing hot air through hollow bricks in the floors and walls. The floor is often so hot that you must wear wooden sandals to keep from burning your feet. The air is thick with steam, clinging to the marble and dripping from the ceiling like a tropical rain. The heat is intense, drawing the toxins and the fatigue from your limbs. You soak in a large communal tub of hot water, the steam blurring the faces of the men around you, creating a sense of quiet, misty isolation in the middle of a city of millions. After the heat, there is the cleaning. Romans did not have soap as we know it. Instead, you use a strigil, a curved metal tool. You or a companion scrape the oil, the sweat, and the city's dust from your skin in long, rhythmic strokes. It is a satisfying, almost meditative process. Finally, to close your pores and shock your system back to life, you take the plunge into the frigidarium, the cold room. The transition from the sweltering heat of the caldarium to the icy, crystal-clear water of the cold pool is a visceral experience. It is a jolt of pure energy that leaves your skin tingling and your mind sharp. But the baths are more than just a place to wash. As you emerge from the water, drying yourself with a coarse linen towel, you realize that the complex is a city within a city. Outside the main bathing halls, there are palaestrae, open-air courtyards where young men wrestle, play ball games, or lift stone weights. There are libraries where a man can sit in silence and listen to a scholar read from a scroll. There are gardens filled with statues where you can stroll and watch the world go by. As you wander through the outer porticos, the smell of food finds you again. Vendors roam the halls, shouting their wares. Sausages, hot buns, fried fish. You might buy a small snack, perhaps some salted nuts or a honey-sweetened cake, to replenish the energy you spent in the heat. You sit on a marble step, watching a group of musicians play a lyre in the corner, feeling a sense of deep, physical peace that is rare in the chaotic life of a plebeian. For this hour, you are not a man worried about next month's rent or the rising price of grain. You are a citizen of Rome, pampered by the state, refreshed by the water, and connected to your community. The noise of the city outside, the carts, the shouting, the dust, feels a world away. The baths have washed away more than just the dirt of the Subura. They have washed away the stress of survival. As the late afternoon sun begins to cast long purple shadows across the courtyard, you prepare to leave. Your skin is clean, your muscles are loose, and you feel a renewed sense of dignity. But the day is not yet over. The evening is approaching, and with it comes the final and most important meal of the day, the cena. As we exit the grand arches of the baths and step back into the cooling streets, the smell of roasting meat and wood fires begins to fill the air. The private side of Roman life is about to begin. In the next part of our journey, we will follow the Roman citizen home, exploring the mysteries of the Roman kitchen, the rituals of the dinner table, and how a city of 1 million people finally finds its way to sleep under the watchful eyes of the gods. The golden hour has arrived, and Rome is preparing for the night. The golden glow of the afternoon has finally faded, giving way to the deep purples and cool blues of the Roman twilight. As you step out of the grand, echoing halls of the baths, the air in the street has changed. The frantic energy of the morning trade has vanished, replaced by a more intimate domestic atmosphere. The sun has dipped behind the Janiculum hill, and for a few fleeting moments, the eternal city is bathed in a soft, ethereal light that makes the marble of the temples seem to glow from within. This is the hour of the cena, the main meal of the day. And for the million souls living within these walls, it is the time to seek the comfort of food and the shelter of home. For the wealthy elite in their sprawling villas on the Aventine Hill, the cena is a lavish, multi-course affair involving exotic meats, spiced wines, and reclining on silk-covered couches. But for you, the ordinary plebeian, the evening meal is a far humbler reality. As you walk back toward your insula, you pass the Thermopolia once again. These street-side kitchens are now at their busiest. Since your small room on the upper floors lacks a hearth or a kitchen, and since the risk of a cooking fire is a constant nightmare for the city, you likely stop here to purchase your dinner. Imagine the scene at the counter, the steam rising from ceramic jars set into the stone, the smell of boiling cabbage, leeks, and the ever-present lentil stew. You might buy a bowl of pulse, a thick, hearty porridge made from emmer wheat, salt, and water. It is the foundational food of the Roman people, the fuel that built the legions and the roads. To make it more palatable, you might add a splash of olive oil, a few pieces of salted fish, or a handful of boiled beans. This is the food of survival, honest and filling, washed down with a final cup of watered-back wine. You carry your meal in a wooden bowl, carefully navigating the darkening alleys as you head back to your apartment. Entering your insula at night is a different experience than in the morning. The narrow stairwell is now a tunnel of shadows. There are no public lights in ancient Rome. The city at night is a place of profound darkness. You feel your way up the stone or wooden steps, guided by the flickering light of a small oil lamp, a lucerna, that you carry in your hand. This lamp, made of simple terracotta, burns with a dim orange flame, smelling of low-grade olive oil and producing a thin trail of soot. It casts long, dancing shadows against the cracked plaster of the walls, making the familiar hallway seem strange and labyrinthine. Inside your room, the silence is relative. You can hear your neighbors through the thin walls, the murmur of a mother putting her child to sleep, the low groan of a tired laborer, and the distant clatter of pottery. You sit by the window for a moment, looking out over the rooftops of the Subura. As the last vestige of sunlight disappears, the true voice of the Roman night begins to emerge. It starts with a sound that defined the city for centuries. The rhythmic, heavy clatter of iron-rimmed wheels on basalt paving stones. Because the streets are too narrow and crowded for heavy traffic during the day, a law established by Julius Caesar ordains that wagons and carts can only move through the city at night. Now, as the citizens sleep, the supply chain of the empire comes alive. Thousands of wagons pulled by oxen and mules groan under the weight of Tuscan marble, Spanish oil, and North African grain. This constant grinding roar is the white noise of Rome. It is a sound that vibrates through the very foundations of your building, a reminder that even when the people rest, the machine of the empire never stops. But the night in Rome is also a time of deep anxiety. In your dark room, you are acutely aware of the two great fears of every city dweller, fire and crime. Without street lighting, the alleys below have become the domain of the grassateurs, muggers and gangs who haunt the shadows. Even the wealthy do not travel the streets at night without a retinue of slaves carrying torches to ward off trouble. For you, the best defense is a heavy wooden bolt across your door and the safety of your high-altitude room. And then there is the fire. You keep your oil lamp far from the straw of your mattress. You know that a single tipped lamp in an insula like yours can turn the entire block into a towering inferno in minutes. The vigiles, Rome's night watchmen and firefighters, patrol the streets with buckets of water and vinegar-soaked blankets, their footsteps a faint, rhythmic thump-thump on the stones below. Their presence is a small comfort in the vast, dark sea of the city. As you lie down on your simple bed, the air in the room is still warm from the day's heat. You pull a wool cloak over yourself, listening to the city breathe. You think about the day that has passed, the cold water of the fountain, the sweat of the workshop, the steam of the baths, and the salt of the porridge. Your life is a cycle of hard labor and simple pleasures, governed by the rising and setting of the sun and the iron will of the wind. Beyond your window, the great monuments of Rome, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the massive temples of the Forum, stand like silent, white ghosts under the moonlight. They are the symbols of eternity, but you, the ordinary person, are the living blood that flows through their veins. You are one of a million, a tiny part of a grand design you will never fully understand. The lamps in the windows of the neighboring insulae are flickering out one by one. The shouting of the tavern goers in the distance is fading, replaced by the tireless grumble of the midnight wagons. The gods of the household, the layers, are watching over your threshold. Slowly, the exhaustion of the day pulls you down into a deep, dreamless sleep. The city of stone, of marble, and of mud is quiet at last. Sleep well, citizen of Rome, for when the sun rises again over the Alban hills, the roar of the world's greatest city will call you back to the streets once more. The eternal city is waiting, and your place in its history is secure, even in the silence of the night. While the daily life of a Roman plebeian is defined by labor, cramped apartments, and simple meals, there is a side to Rome that is loud, violent, and breathtakingly grand. To understand the Roman soul, one must understand the concept of panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The emperors knew that as long as the people's bellies were full of grain and their minds were occupied by the thrill of the games, the city would remain stable. Today, the work in the shops has been suspended by an imperial decree. Today is a day of games, and the entire city is moving with a single electric purpose toward the valley between the Esquiline and Caelian hills. You are walking toward the Flavian Amphitheater, the architectural titan we know today as the Colosseum. Even from blocks away, you can hear it. A low, rhythmic thundering, the sound of 50,000 people chanting, cheering, and stomping their feet. As you turn the corner and the massive travertine walls come into view, the sheer scale of the building seems impossible. It is a mountain of stone rising 4 stories high, draped in giant purple awnings. The Valerium, to shade the spectators from the searing Mediterranean sun. As a citizen, your entry is free, but your place in the social hierarchy is strictly enforced. You present your tessera, a small clay token that acts as your ticket, showing your assigned entrance gate and row. You climb the steep internal staircases, emerging into the blinding sunlight of the upper tiers. Here, in the Summa Cavea, you stand with the other working-class men and women. Looking down, the arena floor is a sea of sand, sprinkled with red cinnabar to hide the stains of what is to come. The air is thick with the smell of parched earth, expensive perfumes from the lower seats, and the wild, musky scent of exotic animals kept in the darkness of the tunnels below. The morning begins with the Venationes, the wild beast hunts. For a plebeian who has never left the city walls, this is a window into the furthest reaches of the empire. You watch in awe as leopards from the Atlas Mountains, lions from Africa, and massive bears from the forests of Germania are released into the arena. To you, these are not just animals. They are symbols of Rome's absolute dominion over nature itself. The crowd roars as skilled hunters, the bestiarii, face these predators with nothing but a spear and their wits. It is a display of human courage and imperial power that leaves your heart racing. As the sun climbs higher, the atmosphere grows more intense. The midday lull is filled with the Noxii, the execution of criminals, but the crowd is waiting for the main event, the gladiators. When the great gates swing open and the warriors march in, the noise is deafening. These men are the rock stars of the ancient world. Though many are slaves or prisoners of war, a successful gladiator can earn fame, wealth, and the adoration of the masses. You have your favorites. Perhaps you cheer for the Murmillo, with his heavy rectangular shield and fish-crested helmet, or the Retiaries, who fights with a net and a trident, relying on speed and agility. The combat is not a chaotic brawl. It is a lethal, disciplined dance. You watch with bated breath as the steel clashes, the sand flying under their sandals. Every move is judged by the crowd. When a warrior falls, the silence is sudden and heavy. 50,000 pairs of eyes turn to the emperor's box. But the emperor often looks to you, the people. You shout, "Mit," to save him, or "Yugula," to finish him, feeling for one brief moment that you hold the power of life and death in your hands. This is the ultimate escape from the anonymity of your daily life. Here, in the stands, your voice matters. But the Colosseum is only one stage for the Roman obsession with spectacle. Just a short walk away, the Circus Maximus offers a different kind of adrenaline. This is the home of the chariot races, an arena so vast it can hold over 200,000 people. The energy here is even more tribal. The fans are divided into 4 factions: the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. You don't just watch the race, you live it. You wear the colors of your faction, you bet your hard-earned copper coins, and you scream until your throat is raw. Imagine the sight of 12 chariots, each pulled by 4 straining horses, lined up at the starting gates. When the white cloth, the mappa, is dropped, it is an explosion of dust and speed. The charioteers, or origai, wrap the reins around their waists, leaning dangerously into the turns. The most perilous part is the meta, the turning post, where chariots often collide in spectacular shipwrecks. To see your favorite driver emerge from the dust, leading the pack on the final lap, is a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy that makes you forget the debt you owe the baker or the leak in your apartment roof. As the final race ends and the sun begins to set, the crowd pours out of the arenas and back into the streets. The air is filled with heated arguments over the referee's decisions and the prowess of the winning horses. For a few hours, the crushing weight of being a poor worker in a giant city has been lifted. You feel a sense of collective identity. You are not just a laborer, you are a Roman, and the world's greatest shows were put on just for you. As you walk back toward the Subura, the adrenaline slowly fades, leaving a pleasant exhaustion. The street vendors are out in force, selling souvenirs, small clay gladiators for children, or lamps decorated with the image of a famous charioteer. You buy a small meat pie and walk slowly, savoring the cooling evening air. The games are over, but their memory will sustain you through the long work days of the coming week. The spectacles of Rome were more than just entertainment. They were the heartbeat of the city. They were where the social order was reinforced, where the people met their leaders, and where the raw power of the empire was made visible. As night falls once again, the echoes of the cheering crowd still seem to vibrate in the air. In our next and final chapter, we will conclude our journey by looking at the legacy of these ordinary lives. We will explore the dreams, the fears, and the quiet dignity of the millions who lived and died in the shadow of the eagles, and why their story, the story of the ordinary Roman, is the most important story of all. The arena is empty, the sand is still, but the spirit of Rome lives on. To the modern mind, religion is often a private matter, a quiet connection between an individual and the divine. But for the ordinary Roman, religion was as visible and tangible as the cobblestones beneath their feet. In Rome, there was no separation between the sacred and the mundane. The gods were everywhere, in the crackle of the kitchen fire, in the rustle of the grain in the market, and in the sudden flight of a hawk across the sky. To be a Roman was to live in a constant silent dialogue with 1,000 different deities, a delicate dance of ritual and prayer designed to maintain the pax deorum, the peace of the gods. As you walk through the streets of the Subura on a typical morning, your first religious act doesn't happen at a grand temple, but at the small shrine in the corner of your room. Every Roman home, no matter how humble, has its lararium. This is the sacred heart of the household. Here you pay your respects to the Lars, the spirits of your ancestors, and the penates, the protectors of your pantry. You might offer a small crumb of bread, a few drops of wine, or a simple garland of flowers. You don't pray for eternal salvation. You pray for the practical things, that your roof doesn't leak during the winter rains, that your children stay healthy, and that your work brings enough coin for the week. Religion in Rome was a contract. Do ut des. The Romans said, "I give so that you might give." It was a business arrangement with the divine. If you performed the ritual correctly, the gods were obligated to protect you. But if you stumbled over a word in a prayer or allowed the sacred flame to go out, the consequences could be disastrous for the entire community. This is why the city is filled with so many temples, from the massive marble-columned pantheon to the tiny weathered shrines at every crossroads. Each neighborhood has its own compedal gods, the spirits of the local streets, and as you pass them, you might touch your hand to your lips or whisper a quick word of gratitude. Beyond the major gods like Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, the ordinary Roman lived with a host of smaller, more specific deities. There was Cardia, the goddess of door hinges, Forculus, the god of the door itself, and Limentinus, the god of the threshold. There was even a god for the first word a child spoke, and a goddess for the ripening of the wheat. For a plebeian, the world was a crowded place, filled with invisible eyes. This created a sense of order, but also a deep-seated superstition. You would never start a journey on an unlucky day, and if a black cat crossed your path or you spilled salt, you might spend the rest of the day in a state of quiet dread, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the religious landscape of Rome was changing. In the crowded tenements of the city, the traditional Olympian gods often felt distant and cold, more interested in the affairs of the state than the struggles of a poor worker. This led many ordinary people to turn toward the mystery cults from the East. You might see a procession of the followers of Isis, the Egyptian goddess, their heads shaved and their sistrums clinking rhythmically. Or you might hear whispers of the underground sanctuaries of Mithras, the Persian sun god, whose rituals took place in dark, cave-like rooms. These cults offered something the state religion did not: a sense of belonging, a promise of an afterlife, and a personal connection to a deity who understood human suffering. And then there are the augurs, the official diviners of Rome. You might see them standing on a high point of the city, staff in hand, watching the sky. They are not looking for weather. They are reading the will of the gods in the flight patterns of birds. If the birds fly to the left, the omens are dark. If to the right, the gods are smiling. No general would go to war, and no senator would pass a law without consulting these signs. To a modern observer, it seems like madness, but to you, it is the highest form of science. It is how you navigate a world that is often cruel and unpredictable. One of the most profound religious experiences for a commoner was the festival of the Parentalia, the Days of the Dead. During this time, the city fell into a somber, quiet mood. You would take a small meal of salt, grain, and wine to the tombs of your family outside the city walls. As you sat by the roadside, sharing a meal with the spirits of your father and grandfather, the gap between the living and the dead seemed to vanish. You were reminded that you were merely a link in a long, unbroken chain of Roman lives. This connection to the past gave you a sense of stability in a city that was always changing, always growing, and always demanding more of you. As the sun sets and the shadows of the temples grow long, the religious life of the city takes on a more mysterious tone. The great Vestal virgins, the most sacred women in Rome, tended the eternal fire in the circular temple of Vesta. As long as that flame burns, Rome will stand. You pass the temple on your way home, seeing the orange glow through the columns, and you feel a strange sense of security. The gods are being fed, the rituals are being performed, and the cosmos is in balance. But religion was not just about the heavens. It was about the earth. It was the glue that held the million people of Rome together. It provided the holidays, the feasts, and the shared stories that made a person feel like a Roman rather than just another anonymous face in the crowd. Whether you were sacrificing a pig at a neighborhood altar or simply nodding to the statue of Mercury in the market, you were participating in a tradition that stretched back to the founding of the city. In our next chapter, we will look to a different kind of ritual, the journey of life and death. We will explore how Romans were born, how they were educated, and finally, how they were remembered. We will follow the Roman citizen from the cradle to the grave, discovering that even in death, the ordinary people of Rome found a way to leave their mark on the world. The stars are coming out over the Forum. The gods are watching. The night is holy. While the streets of Rome are dominated by the noise of men and markets, the true foundation of the empire lies behind the thick walls of the Domus and the Insula. To understand the ordinary Roman, one must understand the familia. In Rome, a family was not just a group of people living together. It was a mini-empire ruled by the paterfamilias, the oldest living male. He held the power of life and death over everyone in his household. Yet, within this strict hierarchy, the lives of women and children were filled with a quiet strength and a daily struggle for identity and survival. Let us begin at the very start, birth. In the ancient world, coming into the world was a perilous journey. For a Roman mother, childbirth was a battle as dangerous as any faced by a legionary on the frontier. Without modern medicine, she relied on the midwife, herbal charms, and prayers to the goddess Juno Lucina. When a baby was born, it was placed on the ground at the feet of the father. If he picked the child up, he formally accepted it into the family. If not, the child could be abandoned. A harsh reality of a world where resources were often scarce. But for those accepted, the 9th day of life brought the dies lustricus, the naming day, where the child received a bulla, a protective amulet worn around the neck to ward off evil spirits and the evil eye. Childhood in the Subura was short. There were no playgrounds. The narrow alleys and the steps of the temples were the schoolrooms of the poor. If you were a young boy from a plebeian family, your education was practical. While the sons of the elite studied Greek rhetoric and philosophy, you likely learned your father's trade by watching and imitating. You would play with walnuts, marble rollers, or rag dolls, but by the age of 7 or 8, the play ended. You were expected to help in the workshop, carry water, or run errands. Life demanded that you grow up fast. For a Roman girl, the path was even more defined. Her education focused on the domestic arts, spinning wool, weaving, and managing a household. In the Roman mind, a virtuous woman was one who stayed at home and worked the loom. However, the reality for an ordinary woman was far more complex. In the crowded streets of Rome, women were everywhere. They ran small shops, worked as laundresses, midwives, and even female gladiators on rare occasions. They were the glue that held the neighborhood together, managing the family's meager finances and navigating the social networks of the insula. The transition to adulthood was marked by a profound ritual. For a boy, usually around the age of 14 to 16, the day came to set aside his childhood bulla and his purple-bordered tunic. In a ceremony at the Forum, he would don the toga virilis, the plain white toga of a man. Suddenly, he was a citizen. He could vote, he could join the army, and he was legally responsible for his actions. For a girl, the transition was different. Her adulthood was marked by marriage. Often as young as 12 or 14, she would be betrothed to a man chosen by her father. On her wedding day, she would leave her childhood home, offering her dolls to the household gods, and step into a new life as a matrona. The Roman marriage was less about romantic love and more about the continuity of the family line. Yet, Roman women held a status that was unique in the ancient Mediterranean. Unlike their Greek counterparts, Roman matrons could own property, inherit wealth, and were respected as the moral guardians of the home. A woman like Cornelia, the famous mother of the Gracchi, was celebrated not for her jewels, but for her children, whom she called her true jewels. In the crowded apartments of the poor, the mother was the one who ensured the fire stayed lit and the grain lasted until the next distribution. But life within the family was not always a scene of domestic peace. The absolute power of the paterfamilias could be tyrannical. A son remained under his father's legal control until the day the father died, regardless of his own age or status. This created a strange tension in Roman society. A man could be a powerful general on the battlefield, but still be legally unable to sign a contract without his father's permission. It was a system built on deep respect for elders and the weight of tradition. The mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. As you walk through the neighborhood in the evening, you hear the sounds of these families through the open windows. You hear a mother singing a lullaby, a father teaching his son the names of the gods, and the laughter of children playing a final game of hide-and-seek before the oil lamps are extinguished. These were the people who provided the sons for the legions and the daughters who would raise the next generation of Romans. They were not mentioned in the history books of the time, but they were the ones who truly lived the Roman experience. As the night deepens, the domestic world retreats into the shadows. The family gathers around the small lararium for a final prayer, seeking protection from the dangers of the Roman night. The cycle of life, birth, growth, marriage, and parenthood continues, an unbroken chain that has sustained the city for 1,000 years. In our next chapter, we will look at the darker side of this society, the world of the enslaved. We will explore the lives of those who had no family rights, no legal standing, and whose labor made the luxury of Rome possible. We will see how the line between freedom and slavery was often thin, and how even in the depths of servitude, the human spirit sought a way to be free. The household is quiet now. The children are dreaming of the games, and the mothers are resting for the toil of tomorrow. The heart of Rome beats in its homes. In the grand narrative of the Roman Empire, we often speak of citizens, senators, and emperors. But beneath the surface of every marble monument and every busy marketplace lies a silent, invisible foundation. The millions of enslaved people whose labor allowed Rome to exist. To be a slave in Rome was not a matter of race, but of fate. You could be a prisoner of war from the forests of Germania, a kidnapped survivor from a pirate raid in the Mediterranean, or even a child born to a slave mother in a Roman household. In the eyes of the law, you were not a person. You were instrumentum vocale, a speaking tool. Walk through the streets of Rome again, but this time look closely at the people behind the counters, those carrying the heavy water jars and those running behind the litters of the wealthy. They are everywhere. Slavery was so deeply woven into the fabric of Roman life that an ordinary plebeian family, living in a cramped insula, might still own 1 or 2 slaves to help with the household chores or the family business. It was a world where human liberty could be lost in a single afternoon of defeat on the battlefield or a single unpaid debt. The life of a slave depended entirely on the character of their master. If you were lucky, You might be a household slave in a moderate home, where you were treated almost like a distant, low-ranking member of the family. You might be a tutor, a cook, or a trusted secretary. But for the thousands who worked in the state-owned mines or the massive agricultural estates, the latifundia, life was a brutal, short-lived nightmare of chains and exhaustion. In the city, the most visible slaves were those working in the public service, cleaning the sewers, maintaining the aqueducts, or serving as clerks in the imperial offices. They were the grease that kept the gears of the city turning, yet they lived in a state of perpetual uncertainty. But Roman slavery was unique in one significant way. It was not necessarily a life sentence. In Rome, the boundary between slavery and freedom was remarkably porous. Through a process called manumission, a slave could be granted their freedom. This could happen in a master's will as a reward for years of loyal service, or a slave could save their peculium, a small amount of money they were allowed to earn through extra work, to literally buy their own liberty. When a slave was freed, they became a libertus, a freedman. This transition was marked by a powerful symbolic act. The former slave would put on the pileus, a conical felt cap that announced to the world that they were no longer a piece of property. But freedom did not mean total independence. A freedman remained a client of his former master, now his patron. He owed him loyalty and certain services, and his children would still bear a social stigma for generations. Yet, for many, this was the ultimate Roman dream, to rise from the chains of the slave market to the dignity of the toga. The success stories of freedmen are among the most fascinating in Roman history. Because they had often spent years managing their masters' businesses, freedmen frequently possessed a sharp commercial instinct that the traditional Roman elite lacked. In the streets of the Subura, you would see wealthy freedmen who had become successful bakers, shipping merchants, or builders. Some even rose to become powerful advisors to the emperor himself, accumulating fortunes that rivaled the oldest noble families. Their presence was a constant reminder to every Roman worker that through skill and perseverance, one could rewrite their destiny. However, the shadow of servitude never truly vanished. Even a wealthy freedman could be reminded of his past at any moment by a sneer from a born-free citizen. This tension between social classes created a restless, upwardly mobile energy in the city. The freedmen were the new blood of Rome, the ones who were most invested in the city's future because they had fought so hard to be a part of it. They built elaborate tombs along the Appian Way, decorated with scenes of their trades, desperate to ensure that though they were born as tools, they would be remembered as men. As night falls, the slaves in the great houses are the last to sleep. They extinguish the lamps, secure the doors, and retreat to their small mats in the corners of hallways or kitchens. Their dreams are the same as yours: a better life for their children, a moment of rest, and the hope that tomorrow might bring a step closer to the pileus. The Roman Empire was a pyramid of power, and while the peak touched the heavens, it was the millions at the base who carried the weight. When you look at the ruins of Rome today, do not just see the emperors who commissioned them. See the hands that carved the stone, the backs that carried the timber, and the spirits that survived the indignity of the auction block. To understand the ordinary Roman is to acknowledge that for every citizen in the Forum, there was a silent shadow behind him, waiting for their chance to step into the light. In our next chapter, we will explore the final destination of every Roman, regardless of their status. We will look at the Roman concept of death, the rituals of the funeral, and the obsession with being remembered. We will follow the Roman citizen to the gates of the underworld, discovering how even in the face of the eternal, the people of Rome sought to keep their stories alive. The city is quiet, and in the darkness, the distinction between master and slave fades into the silence of sleep. The heart of the empire is at rest. We have traveled through the dust of the Roman streets, felt the humid steam of the great imperial baths, heard the blood-chilling roar of the Colosseum, and stood in the silent, haunting shadows of the tombs along the Appian Way. Our journey through the daily life of ancient Rome is finally reaching its conclusion. But as we prepare to leave this world of stone, shadow, and spirit, we must ask ourselves the most important question of all: what truly remains? Why does the story of a simple baker, a weary laundress, a grizzled centurion, or an anonymous slave from 2,000 years ago still resonate so deeply within us today? The answer is not found in the grand, hollow ruins of the Forum or the golden palaces of the emperors. It is found in the enduring, unbreakable legacy of the ordinary. Rome is universally known as the Eternal City, a title it earned through its sheer, stubborn survival across the changing centuries. But the eternity of Rome was not a gift from the gods, nor was it sustained solely by the political brilliance of its Caesars. It was built, brick by heavy brick, and long day by long day, by the millions of unnamed men and women who woke up every morning in the dark, crowded tenements of the Subura. It was their resilience, their calloused hands, their daily sweat, and their unwavering belief in the Roman idea that transformed a small, muddy village on the banks of the Tiber into the magnificent center of the known world. When we gaze upon the colossal arches and the towering temples today, we are not just looking at architecture. We are looking at the fossilized energy of 1,000,000 ordinary lives. Think for a moment of the Roman roads, those straight, unyielding lines of basalt and gravel that still stretch like veins across the vast landscape of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. We often imagine the iron-clad legions that marched upon them. But we must also remember the common laborers who dug the deep trenches, the local surveyors who meticulously marked the path, and the humble merchants who drove their heavy wagons across them every single night. These roads were the internet of the ancient world, the very first great network of human connection. The concept of a globalized society, of shared laws, and of a common language began not in a palace, but in the dirty, hard-working hands of the Roman worker. The legacy of the ordinary Roman is also carved into the very words we speak and the complex laws by which we govern our modern lives. When you walk into a courtroom today, or when you cast a ballot in a local election, you are walking directly in the footsteps of the plebeians who stood in the Forum and demanded their fundamental rights. The ancient struggle of the common people against the entrenched elite, the conflict of the orders, created the first blueprint for modern citizenship. The revolutionary idea that a person has a set of inherent rights, that justice should be written down clearly for all to see, and that the state exists to serve the people rather than the other way around, was forged in the intense heat of the Roman streets. Every time we use words like republic, senate, committee, or citizen, we are echoing the voices of those who haggled in the markets and debated in the alleys of ancient Rome. But perhaps the most poignant and beautiful legacy is the human one. The Romans were the absolute masters of the everyday. They were the ones who invented the multi-story apartment building, the organized shopping mall, the peaceful public park, and even the basic concept of fast food. They faced the exact same daily problems we face today: the high cost of rent, the maddening noise of the city, the search for a meaningful job, and the primal desire to provide a safer, better life for their children. When you look at a modern city at night, with its glowing windows and its crowded, bustling streets, you are looking at a direct, living descendant of ancient Rome. The pulse of the city has not changed in 2 millennia. Only the technology has evolved. As we stand at the edge of the city one last time, watching the silver moon rise over the Tiber, we realize that the ordinary Romans were the world's first truly global citizens. They were a massive melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions, all brought together by the powerful gravity of a single unifying idea. They showed us that a civilization is not just a collection of cold buildings, but a vibrant collection of shared stories. They lived their lives with a quiet, fierce dignity, navigating a world that was often harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Yet, they never stopped building, they never stopped dreaming, and they never once stopped believing that they were part of something much greater than their individual selves. The silence of the ruins today is deceptive. If you listen closely, with your heart as much as your ears, the city is still talking to us. It speaks through the worn, smooth stones of the theater seats, the deep grooves left by heavy chariot wheels in the pavement, and the simple, humorous graffiti scratched into the walls of the taverns. It tells us that these people were here, that they mattered, and that their personal struggles and small triumphs are an inseparable part of our own human story. We are the heirs to their immense labor, the stewards of their sacred memory, and the direct beneficiaries of their restless ambition. Our expansive journey through the heartbeat of the empire is now complete. We have seen Rome not as a sterile museum of cold white marble, but as a living, breathing, and often messy reality. The small oil lamps in the windows of the insulae have all been extinguished. The last of the heavy night wagons has rumbled past the city gates. The gods of the household have been given their final offerings for the night. As the first faint light of a new dawn begins to touch the distant snow-capped peaks of the Apennine Mountains, we leave the eternal city to the gentle care of history. But remember, the next time you walk through a busy, modern city street, or sit in a crowded stadium, or feel the warmth of a shared meal with your friends, you are not walking alone. The ordinary people of Rome are walking right there beside you. Their laughter, their worries, their songs, and their indomitable spirit are woven into the very fabric of our modern lives. They are not gone. They have simply become the solid foundation upon which our entire world is built. The sun is rising on a new age, but the echo of Rome remains, vibrating through the centuries. It is an echo of resilience, of community, and of the enduring, magnificent power of the human spirit. The eternal city lives on, not just in the ruins of Italy, but in every heart that dreams of greatness. This concludes our journey into the daily life of ordinary people in ancient Rome. May the memory of those who came before us continue to light our path into the unknown future. The story of Rome is the story of us. To understand the ordinary Roman, we must step beyond the city walls and follow the dust-choked roads to the frontiers of the empire. For hundreds of thousands of young men from the plebeian class, the ultimate career and the ultimate gamble was the Roman legion. Being a soldier was not just about the glory of conquest. It was a 25-year commitment of grueling labor, relentless discipline, and the constant presence of death. If you were a young man with no land and no prospects in the Subura, the army offered a steady wage, 3 meals a day, and the promise of a plot of land upon retirement. But the price was your youth, your health, and often your life. Imagine waking up before the sun in a leather tent shared with 7 other men. Your contubernium, your closest brothers. Your day doesn't begin with a parade, but with the heavy weight of the sarcina, your marching pack. A Roman soldier was often called Marius's mule because he carried everything he needed to survive. 2 weeks of grain, a saw, a basket, a spade, a cooking pot, and his heavy wooden shield, the scutum. In total, you are burdened with nearly 30 kilograms of gear. You don't just march, you build. Every single night, after a 20-mile trek, you dig a trench and build a fortified camp with wooden palisades. The Roman army did not win through swords alone. It won through the shovel and the spade. Life in the camp was a world of rigid routine. The food was repetitive, mostly a thick wheat porridge or a flatbread called bucellatum, supplemented with whatever vegetables could be foraged or bought from local traders. Meat was a rare luxury. Your drink was pasca, a sharp, refreshing mixture of sour wine or vinegar and water. It was the drink of the common man, designed to kill bacteria and keep a soldier hydrated under the scorching sun of Syria or the damp mists of Britannia. The discipline was absolute. For a minor infraction, a centurion might beat you with his vine staff. For a serious crime, the punishments were terrifying. Yet, there was a profound sense of esprit de corps. You weren't just fighting for the emperor. You were fighting for the man to your left and the man to your right. Your shield was designed to overlap with theirs, creating an unbreakable wall of wood and iron. In the chaos of battle, your world narrowed down to the few inches of space in front of your gladius, the short, lethal, stabbing sword that conquered the world. But war was only a small fraction of a soldier's life. Most of your years were spent in the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. You became a builder of civilization. You were the one who paved the roads, constructed the bridges, and laid the foundations of new cities like London, Paris, and Vienna. A legionary was a mason, a carpenter, and an engineer as much as he was a warrior. You lived in frontier towns that grew up around the forts, where you might have an unofficial camp wife and children, despite the legal ban on soldiers marrying. The psychological toll was heavy. Letters found at forts like Vindolanda on Hadrian's Wall reveal the human side of the iron sandals. Soldiers asking for more warm socks and underwear from home, invitations to birthday parties, and complaints about the lonely cold of the north. These were ordinary men, far from home, holding back the tide of barbarians to ensure that the citizens back in Rome could sleep safely in their beds. When you finally reached your 25th year of service, if you survived the skirmishes, the diseases, and the brutal marches, you received your onista missio. This was your honorable discharge. You were given a sum of money, or, more commonly, a plot of land in a veterans' colony. You became a farmer, a respected member of a new community, finally allowed to legally marry and spend your remaining years in peace. Your bronze military diploma was your most prized possession, a document that guaranteed Roman citizenship for you and your descendants. As we look at the ruins of a frontier fort, we see more than just military strategy. We see the footprints of the common man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. The legions were the great social elevator of Rome, taking a poor boy from the slums and turning him into a pioneer of a new world. The iron sandals may have worn out, but the roads they trod still remain. While we often imagine Rome as a city of sun-drenched marble and orderly processions, there was another Rome that only emerged when the sun dipped below the horizon. A shadow city where the laws of the emperor felt distant and the only rule was survival. This was the urban underworld, a labyrinth of dark alleys, windowless taverns, and dangerous street corners where the ordinary citizen feared to tread without a torch and a stout wooden club. To truly understand the Roman experience, we must leave the safety of the illuminated forum and venture into the pitch-black heart of the Suburra at midnight, exploring the crime, the vice, and the hidden dangers that made Rome one of the most treacherous cities in the ancient world. As the heavy wooden shutters of the shops are bolted for the night, a profound and heavy darkness falls over the city. Rome had no public street lighting. The only light came from the flickering oil lamps in private windows or the moon reflecting off the Tiber. In this gloom, the city transformed. The narrow, winding streets, many no wider than a man's outstretched arms, became a hunting ground for the grassateurs, the street muggers, and organized gangs who ruled the night. If you were an ordinary person forced to move through the city after dark, you lived in a state of constant, heart-pounding anxiety. You would listen for the sound of sandals on stone, for a whisper in a doorway, or the sudden clatter of a falling tile. Crime was not just a possibility, it was an environmental hazard of Roman life. The Roman legal system was sophisticated, but it lacked one thing we take for granted today: a professional, city-wide police force dedicated to investigating crime. The vigiles, though tasked with firefighting and some night watching, were spread thin across a city of over 1 million people. For the ordinary plebeian, justice was often a private matter. If someone stole your cloak or broke into your small apartment in the insula, there was no emergency number to call. You had to catch the thief yourself or rely on your neighbors to join in a hue and cry to chase the culprit down. This lack of public security led to a culture of self-defense. Every household had its own crude weapons, and the doors of even the poorest apartments were reinforced with heavy iron bolts and chains, turning every home into a miniature fortress. Deep within the underbelly of the city, the popine and caupone, the low-end taverns and inns, served as the headquarters for the Roman criminal element. These were not the refined dining rooms of the elite. They were smoke-filled, dimly lit basements where the air was thick with the smell of sour wine, cheap garlic, and unwashed bodies. Here, professional gamblers sat around stone tables, using loaded dice made of bone to swindle the unwary. Prostitution, though legal and regulated in official brothels, spilled out into these taverns and into the shadowy arches of the great monuments like the Circus Maximus. In these places, a man's life could be worth less than a cup of watered-down wine. Assassins, known as sicarii or daggermen, could be hired for a handful of silver denarii, and the deep, muddy waters of the Tiber frequently carried away the evidence of a midnight dispute. But the darkness of Rome wasn't just about physical violence. It was also a world of spiritual and psychological dread. The Romans were deeply superstitious, and the night was believed to be populated by more than just thieves. They feared the Strix, a bird-like demon that preyed on children, and they spoke in hushed tones of restless ghosts, the lemurs, who haunted the places where blood had been shed. To protect themselves, ordinary people used curse tablets, small sheets of lead inscribed with terrifying spells and buried in the ground or thrown into wells. These tablets, or defictions, reveal the hidden grudges of the Roman people. A laundress cursing a thief who stole a shirt, a jilted lover asking the gods of the underworld to twist the heart of a rival, or a charioteer trying to magically bind the horses of his opponent. The social geography of crime was also tied to the insulae. Because these apartment buildings were so poorly constructed and packed so tightly together, they were a paradise for burglars. A thief didn't even need to use the front door. They could simply climb from one balcony to another or drop down from a roof. The upper floors, home to the poorest citizens, were the most vulnerable. While the wealthy had slaves to guard their doors day and night, the plebeian family slept with one eye open, listening for the creak of wood or the sound of a prying tool. This constant state of vigilance created a unique Roman character, tough, cynical, and deeply skeptical of authority. Even the great games in the arenas had a dark side. The betting rings were often controlled by powerful underworld figures who didn't hesitate to fix a race or intimidate a gladiator. The massive crowds of the Colosseum were a prime target for pickpockets, who worked the tiers with professional precision, slicing open leather purses with sharpened coins while the spectators were distracted by the carnage on the sand. In the chaos of a million-person city, anonymity was a criminal's greatest asset. A man could commit a crime in one district and disappear into the labyrinth of another, never to be seen again. As we look at the ruins of Rome today, we must remember that the white marble we see was once stained by the realities of a gritty, dangerous metropolis. The Pax Romana was a grand political idea, but for the man living in a one-room apartment in the Subura, peace was something he had to fight for every single night. The shadows of Rome were just as much a part of its identity as its sunlit temples. It was a city of extreme contrasts, of divine law and cold-blooded murder, of soaring ambition and desperate vice. The night is deep now, and the wagons are still grumbling through the streets, their noise masking the smaller, more sinister sounds of the alleys. The flickering lamps are burning low, and the vigiles are beginning their next patrol, their torches casting long, wavering shadows against the brickwork. In this darkness, the ordinary Roman finds his way to sleep, knowing that the sun will eventually rise to chase the shadows away, but also knowing that the underworld will always be there, waiting for the light to fade once more. The city of light and the city of shadows are two sides of the same coin, and together they form the complete picture of the eternal city. In the grand, sun-drenched streets of Rome, amidst the towering columns of Victory and the opulent palaces of the elite, there lived a silent and invisible enemy that claimed more lives than any barbarian horde on the frontiers. This was the world of disease, infection, and the desperate, often terrifying struggle for health. For the ordinary Roman living in the suffocating density of an insula, life was a fragile gift. In a city of 1,000,000 people, where clean water was a miracle of engineering, but sewage often lingered in the streets, the boundary between a healthy afternoon at the baths and a feverish descent into the underworld was thin and unpredictable. To understand the ordinary Roman, we must explore their medicine. A strange, swirling mixture of brilliant Greek science, folk remedies, and absolute, desperate superstition. Imagine waking up in your small room with a sharp, throbbing pain in your side, or a burning fever that makes the walls of your apartment seem to close in. You have no hospital to visit. The concept of a public infirmary for civilians does not exist. Your first line of defense is the household. In the Roman mind, the paterfamilias was not just the legal head of the home, but its chief physician. He would reach for the most famous of all Roman remedies, cabbage. To the Romans, cabbage was a wonder drug, believed to cure everything from indigestion to open wounds when applied as a poultice. If the cabbage failed, the family might turn to mummy dust, rare herbs from the East, or even more bizarre concoctions involving the ashes of burnt wool or the gall of a wild boar. For the poor, medicine was a chaotic art practiced on the kitchen table. If the ailment grew too severe for home remedies, you would seek out a medicus. However, in Rome, anyone could call themselves a doctor. There was no formal licensing, no medical school exams, and no board of ethics. While some Medici were highly trained Greeks who understood the theories of Galen and Hippocrates, many others were charlatans looking to swindle a desperate plebeian of his last few copper coins. If you visited a doctor's small shop, or taberna medica, you would be greeted by the sight of bronze scalpels, bone saws, and terrifying-looking forceps. Without anesthesia, relying only on heavy wine, or perhaps a bit of opium juice, surgery was a traumatic experience of raw endurance. Yet, Roman surgeons were remarkably skilled. They could perform successful cataract surgeries with fine needles and even trepanation, drilling into the skull to relieve pressure, as evidenced by healed bone found in Roman cemeteries. But medicine was never just physical for a Roman. It was deeply spiritual. If a doctor's herbs failed, it was clearly because the gods were displeased. This led the sick to the doors of the Asclepion, the temples of Aesculapius, the god of healing. As a patient, you would undergo a ritual of purification and then spend the night in the temple, a practice known as incubation. You would sleep on the floor, hoping the god would visit you in a dream to deliver a cure or a sign. When people were healed, they would leave behind ex votos, terracotta models of the body part that was cured. Walking into a Roman healing shrine was a surreal experience. The walls were covered with thousands of clay hands, feet, ears, and even internal organs, a silent forest of gratitude from the millions who had suffered before you. Beyond the individual's struggle for health lay the terrifying specter of the plague. In a city as packed as Rome, an outbreak was a death sentence for thousands. They didn't understand germs or viruses. They spoke of miasma, a corrupt and poisonous air that rose from the swamps or was sent by the wrath of Apollo. During the Great Antonine Plague, which decimated the empire in the 2nd century, the streets of Rome became a landscape of horror. The funeral pyres burned day and night, and the usual dignity of Roman burial was replaced by the desperate digging of mass pits. For the ordinary person, there was no escape. You could only shut your shutters, burn incense to mask the smell of death, and pray to every god you knew, both Roman and foreign, to pass over your household. Public health was Rome's greatest contradiction. On one hand, the city boasted the Cloaca Maxima, a massive sewer system that was the envy of the world, and 14 aqueducts that delivered fresh water to public fountains. On the other hand, the insulae lacked plumbing. Most people dumped their waste directly into the street or into small vats beneath the stairs. This created a breeding ground for parasites and water-borne diseases. Life expectancy was low. If you survived childhood, a feat in itself, you could hope to reach your 40s or 50s. The presence of death was so common that it shaped the Roman character into one of stoic resilience. They didn't ask why they were sick. They asked which god they had offended and what price was required for recovery. Even the food you ate was a form of medicine. The Roman diet, heavy in garlic, onions, and leeks, was believed to keep the blood clean. They used honey as an antibiotic for burns and vinegar to wash wounds, practices that we now know had genuine scientific merit. They were a people who lived at the intersection of brilliant observation and wild imagination. A soldier might survive a gut wound because his surgeon washed the instruments in boiling water. Yet that same soldier would wear a lead amulet around his neck to protect him from the malaria, the bad air of the marshes. As we look back at the Roman struggle for health, we see a people who were profoundly vulnerable yet incredibly brave. They faced pain without numbing agents and loss without modern explanations. Their medicine was a testament to their desire to survive against all odds. When you walk past the ruins of a Roman pharmacy today, you are walking past a place where thousands of people once stood, clutching a few coins, hoping for a miracle, and fighting for one more day in the eternal city. The struggle for health was the most personal war a Roman ever fought. It was a war fought with herbs, with steel, and with prayer. And though they lost many battles, their determination to understand the human body and to heal the suffering laid the very foundations of the medical world we inhabit today. The oil lamps in the healing shrines are flickering. The scent of medicinal herbs hangs heavy in the air, and the city waits for another dawn, hoping for the strength to endure. In the grand, sun-drenched streets of Rome, amidst the towering columns of victory and the opulent palaces of the elite, there lived a silent and invisible enemy that claimed more lives than any barbarian horde on the frontiers. This was the world of disease, infection, and the desperate, often terrifying struggle for health. For the ordinary Roman living in the suffocating density of an insula, life was a fragile gift. In a city of 1 million people, where clean water was a miracle of engineering, but sewage often lingered in the streets, the boundary between a healthy afternoon at the baths and a feverish descent into the underworld was thin and unpredictable. To understand the ordinary Roman, we must explore their medicine, a strange, swirling mixture of brilliant Greek science, folk remedies, and absolute, desperate superstition. Imagine waking up in your small room with a sharp, throbbing pain in your side, or a burning fever that makes the walls of your apartment seem to close in. You have no hospital to visit. The concept of a public infirmary for civilians does not exist. Your first line of defense is the household. In the Roman mind, the paterfamilias was not just the legal head of the home, but its chief physician. He would reach for the most famous of all Roman remedies, cabbage. To the Romans, cabbage was a wonder drug, believed to cure everything from indigestion to open wounds, when applied as a poultice. If the cabbage failed, the family might turn to mummy dust, rare herbs from the East, or even more bizarre concoctions involving the ashes of burnt wool or the gall of a wild boar. For the poor, medicine was a chaotic art practiced on the kitchen table. If the ailment grew too severe for home remedies, you would seek out a medicus. However, in Rome, anyone could call themselves a doctor. There was no formal licensing, no medical school exams, and no board of ethics. While some Medici were highly trained Greeks who understood the theories of Galen and Hippocrates, many others were charlatans looking to swindle a desperate plebeian of his last few copper coins. If you visited a doctor's small shop or taberna medica, you would be greeted by the sight of bronze scalpels, bone saws, and terrifying-looking forceps. Without anesthesia, relying only on heavy wine or perhaps a bit of opium juice, surgery was a traumatic experience of raw endurance. Yet, Roman surgeons were remarkably skilled. They could perform successful cataract surgeries with fine needles and even trepanation, drilling into the skull to relieve pressure, as evidenced by healed bone found in Roman cemeteries. But medicine was never just physical for a Roman. It was deeply spiritual. If a doctor's herbs failed, it was clearly because the gods were displeased. This led the sick to the doors of the Asclepion, the temples of Aesculapius, the god of healing. As a patient, you would undergo a ritual of purification and then spend the night in the temple, a practice known as incubation. You would sleep on the floor, hoping the god would visit you in a dream to deliver a cure or a sign. When people were healed, they would leave behind ex votos, terracotta models of the body part that was cured. Walking into a Roman healing shrine was a surreal experience. The walls were covered with thousands of clay hands, feet, ears, and even internal organs, a silent forest of gratitude from the millions who had suffered before you. Beyond the individual struggle for health lay the terrifying specter of the plague. In a city as packed as Rome, an outbreak was a death sentence for thousands. They didn't understand germs or viruses. They spoke of miasma, a corrupt and poisonous air that rose from the swamps or was sent by the wrath of Apollo. During the Great Antonine Plague, which decimated the empire in the 2nd century, the streets of Rome became a landscape of horror The funeral pyres burned day and night, and the usual dignity of Roman burial was replaced by the desperate digging of mass pits. For the ordinary person, there was no escape. You could only shut your shutters, burn incense to mask the smell of death, and pray to every god you knew, both Roman and foreign, to pass over your household. Public health was Rome's greatest contradiction. On one hand, the city boasted the Cloaca Maxima, a massive sewer system that was the envy of the world, and 14 aqueducts that delivered fresh water to public fountains. On the other hand, the insulae lacked plumbing. Most people dumped their waste directly into the street or into small vats beneath the stairs. This created a breeding ground for parasites and water-borne diseases. Life expectancy was low. If you survived childhood, a feat in itself, you could hope to reach your 40s or 50s. The presence of death was so common that it shaped the Roman character into one of stoic resilience. They didn't ask why they were sick. They asked which god they had offended and what price was required for recovery. Even the food you ate was a form of medicine. The Roman diet, heavy in garlic, onions, and leeks, was believed to keep the blood clean. They used honey as an antibiotic for burns and vinegar to wash wounds, practices that we now know had genuine scientific merit. They were a people who lived at the intersection of brilliant observation and wild imagination. A soldier might survive a gut wound because his surgeon washed the instruments in boiling water. Yet that same soldier would wear a lead amulet around his neck to protect him from the malaria, the bad air of the marshes. As we look back at the Roman struggle for health, we see a people who were profoundly vulnerable yet incredibly brave. They faced pain without numbing agents and loss without modern explanations. Their medicine was a testament to their desire to survive against all odds. When you walk past the ruins of a Roman pharmacy today, you are walking past a place where thousands of people once stood, clutching a few coins, hoping for a miracle, and fighting for one more day in the eternal city. The struggle for health was the most personal war a Roman ever fought. It was a war fought with herbs, with steel, and with prayer. And though they lost many battles, their determination to understand the human body and to heal the suffering laid the very foundations of the medical world we inhabit today. The oil lamps in the healing shrines are flickering. The scent of medicinal herbs hangs heavy in the air, and the city waits for another dawn, hoping for the strength to endure.